Somewhere in Russia, far from any city, far from any noise, there is a building that most people don't even know exists. No tourists visit it. No signs point to it. Even the road that leads to it feels like it's trying to forget where it's going. The land around it is flat and empty, a huge open space called the steppe, where the wind blows and nothing else moves. In winter, the temperature drops so low that the air itself feels dangerous. In summer, the heat presses down with no trees to block it. And sitting in the middle of all of this nothing is a place where some of the most dangerous human beings on Earth are locked away. Forever. This place has a name. A strange name. A name that doesn't sound like a prison at all. They call it the Black Dolphin. If you've never heard of this place before, you're about to find out why some people say it is the most frightening prison in the world. Stay with us, because what's inside these walls is unlike anything you've ever seen. And if this is your first time here, subscribe so you never miss what we uncover next. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of the prison. That story is hundreds of years old. Let's start with a question. What do you do with a person who has done something so terrible, so unimaginably evil, that a regular prison just doesn't feel like enough? What do you do with someone who can never, ever be trusted to walk free again? In most countries, that question leads to a life sentence. A small cell, bars on the window, time ticking by until death. Russia answered that question differently. Russia built the Black Dolphin. Now, if you looked at it from the outside, the first thing you might notice is something strange at the front gate. A small sculpture. A dolphin, painted black, sitting in a little fountain. It doesn't look scary. It almost looks playful. The prisoners made it themselves. That dolphin is the only soft thing about this place. Everything else is steel, concrete, and silence. The prison's real name is Penal Colony Number 6. It sits in a small town called Soleiletsk, in the Orenburg region of Russia, right near the border with Kazakhstan. The nearest big city is Orenburg, about 50 miles away. There are no busy streets nearby, no neighbors to hear anything, no civilization to run toward if you somehow got out. That somehow is important, because in the history of the Black Dolphin, its modern history as a maximum security prison, not a single person has ever escaped. The land this prison sits on has held criminals for a very, very long time. The first records of a jail in this exact spot go back to 1745. Back then, Russia was ruled by an empress, and the area around Soleiletsk was famous for something unexpected: salt. The town's name literally means salt lake. Convicts were sent here to dig salt out of the ground. Hard, back-breaking work in a remote, harsh place. It was punishment through exhaustion. Then, in the 1770s, something happened in Russia that changed everything. A man named Emelian Pugachev led a massive rebellion against the Russian Empire. Thousands of peasants, Cossacks, and escaped convicts joined him. They burned, they fought, they terrified the government. When the rebellion was finally crushed, the authorities needed somewhere to put the troublemakers, the most dangerous ones, the ones they never wanted causing problems again. They looked at Soleiletsk, and they said, here. Over the next few centuries, the prison passed through many hands and many names. It was part of the Russian Empire. Then the Soviet Union took it over, and it became known as NKVD Prison Number 2, the NKVD being Stalin's feared secret police. It was used to hold political prisoners and others the Soviet government wanted to disappear. It wasn't until the year 2000 that the Black Dolphin became what it is today, a place built specifically for Russia's very worst criminals. People serving life sentences. People who would never see the outside world again. The prison started accepting these inmates on November 1st, 2000. And from that first day, the rules were unlike anything in Russia or almost anywhere in the world. Here is what happens when a prisoner arrives at the Black Dolphin. First, they travel there. And the journey itself is already a punishment. Russia is a massive country, and prisoners are transported in what are called Stolopin cars, old-style train compartments with no windows, crammed with other prisoners, with barely enough room to breathe. These journeys can last weeks. Prisoners don't know exactly where they're going. They're given almost no information. They sit in the dark, in the heat or the cold, eating little, sleeping less. When the train finally stops and they are brought out, something strange happens. A guard puts a blindfold over their eyes. Then they are handcuffed. Then they are walked, bent over at the waist, with their handcuffed hands pushed up behind their back, higher than their hips, into the prison. Why bent over? Because when your head is down and your arms are twisted behind you, you can't look around. You can't memorize the layout. You can't plan anything. You arrive confused, disoriented, and completely controlled. That blindfold doesn't just happen on arrival day. Every single time a prisoner is moved from one building to another inside the Black Dolphin, every time, without exception, the blindfold goes on. The bent-over walk begins. The message is clear from the very first moment. You are not in control here. You never will be again. Each cell in the Black Dolphin is small, about 50 square feet, roughly the size of a large bathroom. 2 prisoners share each one. Inside, a small table, a toilet, dim light, a window with bars so thick that almost no natural light gets through. The walls are painted in dull, flat colors that seem designed to make the room feel even heavier. But the cell itself isn't the security feature. The doors are. Every cell has not 1, not 2, but 3 steel doors, one after the other, each one locked separately. You can knock on one all you want. The next 2 aren't going anywhere. And that's just the physical barrier. Above each cell, cameras watch around the clock. Not just during the day, always. There is no moment that is not recorded, not observed, not monitored. A guard walks past every cell every 15 minutes, 24 hours a day, every single day of the year. There are no days off from being watched. The prisoners themselves must follow rules that are hard to imagine. Every morning when they wake up, they cannot sit on their beds again until it's time to sleep. For roughly 16 hours every day, they must either stand or walk in their tiny cell. If a guard sees an inmate resting on their bed during the day, it's a violation. When a guard speaks to them, they must answer with 2 words, "Yes, sir." That's it. That's the communication. Our times a day, soup arrives. Prisoners are allowed books, newspapers, and a small radio. That is the entertainment. That is the window to the outside world. A radio, some paper, and for 90 minutes each day, 90 minutes, they are taken out of their cells to exercise. But don't imagine a yard with open sky and fresh air. They exercise in a large cage. While they are in that cage, guards search their cells. Everything is checked. Everything. One prison guard, Lieutenant Dennis Avsiuk, once spoke to cameras from National Geographic, one of the very few times Western journalists were ever given any access to the Black Dolphin. He described the men inside with words that made even hardened viewers uncomfortable. He said the main crime committed by the convicts was murder. But he added that there were also maniacs, pedophiles, terrorists. Then he said something that has stayed with people ever since. To call them people, he said, it makes your tongue bend backwards just to say it. I have never felt any sympathy for them. Those are not easy words. And to understand why a guard might feel that way, you need to understand who is inside the Black Dolphin. The prison holds around 700 inmates. Every single one of them is serving a life sentence. Every single one has been convicted of something horrific enough that the Russian courts decided they could never be freed. Now here's a number that should stop you cold. Researchers who have studied the Black Dolphin's population found that the total number of murders committed by those 700 inmates, when you add them all up, approaches 4,000 people. That's an average of about 5 murders per person. But that's just an average. Some inmates committed far fewer. Others committed crimes so large, so long-running, that the number beside their name alone would take your breath away. We're talking about serial killers, terrorists, people convicted of crimes against children, cannibals. Yes, cannibals. More than one. And they are all here, behind those 3 steel doors, under those cameras, walking their 50 square feet of floor, day after day, for the rest of their lives. There is one inmate whose story became known to the outside world when those National Geographic cameras were finally allowed inside. His name is Vladimir Nikolaev. He is perhaps the most recognizable face of the Black Dolphin, not because he is the most dangerous person there, but because he agreed to speak. He sat down in front of the cameras and talked. What he said, calmly, with a strange smile, would disturb anyone who heard it. But we're not going to tell you his full story yet, because once you hear it, you'll understand exactly why this prison was built the way it was, and why those guards walk past every 15 minutes without stopping, and why the blindfolds go on before every single move. What Vladimir Nikolaev did is not something you forget. Before we get there, drop a comment below and tell us. Did you know this prison existed before watching this? Because most people have no idea. Let us know where you're watching from. The Black Dolphin has existed in different forms for almost 300 years. Empresses sent criminals here. Soviet dictators sent dissidents here. And today, a modern government sends its most unreachable, most dangerous citizens here, the ones it has decided the world simply cannot have back. There is a phrase that has been repeated by more than one person who works inside the Black Dolphin. When asked how inmates eventually leave the prison, the answer is always the same. One guard said it plainly: "The only way to leave is to die." And one of the inmates, a man who has spent years staring at those three steel doors, said something that tells you everything about what life inside that prison does to a person. "If you constantly think about how you are here," he said, "what is waiting for you? That you won't ever get free, that you are left here alone. You simply won't make it." The Black Dolphin doesn't just lock people up. It makes them face what they did, every hour of every day, with no escape and no end in sight. The men inside those cells, they're not just dangerous. Some of them have stories so strange, so twisted, so hard to believe, that when you hear them, you'll wonder how the same world that made them also made the rest of us. And the prison itself? It has secrets too, things that happened inside its walls, moments that tested even the toughest guards. His name is Vladimir Nikolaev. He was born in 1959 in a city in western Russia called Novocheboksarsk. By the time he was 21, he had already been convicted of theft and robbery. Not unusual for someone who would end up in prison. Lots of criminals start small. But Vladimir didn't stay small. In the 1990s, something happened that crossed a line so far, most people can't even bring themselves to think about it. And when National Geographic cameras were allowed inside the Black Dolphin, after 2 full years of negotiations just to get through the front gate, Vladimir Nikolaev agreed to sit down and talk. What he said was calm, relaxed even. That was the most disturbing part. He leaned back and said it had started by accident. He had come home from a party one night, a little drunk. Near the door to his apartment building, another man, also drunk, asked him for a lighter. They argued. Then they fought. And when the fight was over, the other man was dead. Vladimir panicked. He carried the body upstairs to his apartment. He tried to revive the man with cold water. When that didn't work, he realized what he had done. And then he made a decision that changed everything. He dragged the body to his bathtub. He began to cut it apart, planning, he said, to bury the pieces and hide the evidence. But then, in the middle of all of it, something struck him. That's the word he used. Something struck him. He cut a piece of flesh from the man's thigh. He boiled it. He said he tried it, didn't like it, so he chopped it up and fried it in a pan instead. And then he gave some of what was left to a friend, telling him it was kangaroo meat. The friend took it home. His wife used it to make dumplings. She fed it to her children. None of them knew what they had eaten. None of them had any idea. Vladimir Nikolaev did this more than once. He sold 5 kilograms of human flesh at an open market, telling buyers it was exotic animal meat, kangaroo, from far away. And he almost got away with it. What caught him wasn't a detective. It wasn't a witness. It was a woman who thought the meat tasted strange. She brought a sample to a doctor. The doctor examined it and found something that turned his stomach cold: human blood. The police were called. Nikolaev was arrested shortly after at his home. When investigators searched his apartment, they found human remains. The bathtub told the rest of the story. He was convicted in 1997 of 2 counts of murder. Originally sentenced to death, his sentence was changed to life imprisonment in 1999 when Russia suspended the death penalty by presidential decree. In 2001, he was transferred to the Black Dolphin. There, sitting in his small cell, he once told an interviewer that while he was generally against the death penalty, he would prefer it for himself. He said living the rest of his life in that prison, knowing it would never end, was worse than any other punishment he could imagine. And somehow, that might be the most unsettling part of his story. Not what he did, but the fact that the Black Dolphin itself, the silence, the walls, the watching eyes, the endless days, was enough to make even him wish it would just be over. But Vladimir Nikolaev is only one face in a prison full of them. Walk past the cells of the Black Dolphin, and behind those 3 steel doors, you will find men whose stories stretch the limits of what a person can believe about other human beings. There are serial killers, men who killed not once or twice, but over and over again, sometimes for years, before they were caught. There are terrorists, men who planned attacks that killed crowds of people in a single moment. And there are men convicted of crimes against children, the kind that no prison guard wants to speak about for long, in which the inmates themselves, in a strange twist, despise above all others. Even in the Black Dolphin, there is a hierarchy of hate, and the men who hurt children sit at the very bottom of it. One of the most recognizable names inside the Black Dolphin belongs to a man connected to one of the darkest days in modern Russian history. His name is Nurpashy Kalayev. On September 1st, 2004, the first day of school, a group of armed men stormed a school in the town of Beslan, in the south of Russia. They took approximately 1,200 people hostage. Most of them were children. They had come to school that morning with new backpacks, new pencils, new shoes. Some were holding flowers for their teachers, the way Russian children do on the first day of the year. For 3 days, those children and their parents were held inside the school gymnasium. There was little food, almost no water. Bombs hung from the basketball hoops above their heads. When the siege finally ended on September 3rd, more than 330 people were dead. 186 of them were children. Nurpashy Kalayev was the only one of the 32 attackers captured alive. His claim at trial was that he had been told they were attacking a military checkpoint, not a school. The court did not accept this defense. In 2006, he was sentenced to life in prison. His location in the Russian prison system is a guarded secret. He was reportedly given a new name to protect him from other inmates. For a time, there were questions about whether he was even still alive. Russian officials eventually confirmed he was. Whether he is in the Black Dolphin or another facility, his crime belongs in the same conversation, and his sentence carries the same weight, forever. If this documentary has made you think, drop a comment below and tell us. Do you think a prison like the Black Dolphin is justice, or is it something else entirely? There's no right or wrong answer. We want to hear yours. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. There's a lot more like this coming. Now let's step back from the individual stories for a moment. Because the Black Dolphin is not just a collection of terrible people. It is also a question. A big, uncomfortable question that countries all over the world are still arguing about. What is prison for? In many countries, especially in Western Europe, the answer includes the word rehabilitation. The idea that prison should not only punish, but also try to fix something. That even the worst people might one day be different. Better. Safe. There is no rehabilitation program for its inmates. No education path that leads anywhere. No plan for what happens when a man has served his time, because his time will never be served. It ends when he does. The prison exists not to change the men inside it, but to hold them, permanently, completely, without hope of release. Human rights organizations have criticized this approach. They have pointed to the isolation, the strict routines, the limited human contact, and the psychological pressure that comes from knowing you will die in your cell. They argue that these conditions, over many years, amount to a kind of slow mental destruction. The Russian government's position, broadly speaking, is that the men inside the Black Dolphin do not deserve rehabilitation, that their crimes were so severe, so final for their victims, that nothing short of permanent removal from society is appropriate. And here is the uncomfortable truth. When you look at the numbers, 700 men, more than 3,500 victims combined, it is hard for most people to feel much sympathy for those behind those 3 steel doors. But the question remains, and it doesn't go away just because the answer is uncomfortable. At 6 in the morning, the lights come on. There is no sleeping in. The day begins whether you are ready or not. For the next 16 hours, until 10 at night, the men cannot lie on their beds. They stand. They sit on the small chairs at the small tables. They walk back and forth in their 50 square feet of space. Some read. Books are allowed. Newspapers too. A small radio connects them to the outside world. News, music, voices from a world they will never return to. 4 times a day, food arrives. Mostly bread and soup. Small portions of fish or meat sometimes. It is not lavish, but it is not designed to starve, just to sustain. Once a day, for those 90 minutes, they are taken out. Blindfolded. Walk bent over. Into the cage. They exercise in that small outdoor space. And while they do, their cells are taken apart piece by piece. Guards search for anything hidden, anything forbidden, anything that shouldn't be there. Then they are walked back, blindfolded again. 3 doors close behind them, and the day starts over. This is not one day. This is every day, 365 days a year, for the rest of their lives. One inmate, not Nikolaev, but another man whose name was shared with researchers, said something that stopped people who heard it. He said he had learned not to think forward. He did not think about next week, next month, next year. He thought only about the day in front of him, the hour in front of him, because if he tried to see the full picture, the years stretching out ahead, each one identical to the last, until the last one, he said his mind would break. He said you survive the black dolphin the same way you eat something too large to swallow whole, one small piece at a time. And you try very hard not to look at what's left on the plate. Now here is the thing about the black dolphin that people don't always talk about. The guards live with this too. Not as prisoners, obviously. They go home. They have families. They have lives outside the walls. But for 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day, they walk those corridors. They look through those small windows and those 3 steel doors. They watch men who have done things that most human beings cannot even imagine. They hear the silence. They carry out the rules. They check the cells every 15 minutes, year after year. Lieutenant Dennis Avsiuk, the guard who spoke to National Geographic, was direct about what that does to a person. He said he had never felt any sympathy for the men he watched. But he also said something between the lines, something that people who work in places like this often say, without quite saying it. The work changes you. Not in a dramatic way. Quietly. Slowly. The same way water shapes stone. Not in a single strike, but over time, from the same direction, every single day. The black dolphin is a place of permanence. For the inmates, permanence is the punishment. For the guards, permanence is the job. A prison in the middle of nothing. 700 men. More than 3,500 victims who will never come back. A dolphin made of concrete sitting at the front gate. Painted black, built by the very people locked inside. The only soft thing about the whole place. That dolphin is strange when you think about it. Dolphins are fast. They are free. They move through open ocean with nothing to stop them. They don't belong in cages. They don't belong in the middle of a dry steppe, far from any sea, frozen in concrete. Because the men inside the black dolphin once had freedom too. They had whole lives, choices, moments, mornings where anything was still possible. And then they made decisions that took all of that away. Not just from themselves, from the people they hurt, from the families who lost someone and never got them back. The black dolphin sits at the gate. It doesn't move. It doesn't swim. And behind it, 700 men sit in their cells, listening to radios that bring them the sound of a world that has moved on without them. One of them is Vladimir Nikolaev, who laughed when he told his story on camera. One of them connected to Beslan, where children brought flowers on the first day of school and never came home. One of them is a man you have never heard of, who did something you will never know about, and who will spend the rest of his days in those 50 square feet until one morning the guards do their check, and he is no longer standing. And the prison will go on. The wind will blow. The steppe will stretch flat in all directions. And the black dolphin will keep watching the gate. Still, silent, going nowhere.